Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another webinar organized jointly by the Islamic Renaissance Front and the Islam and Liberty Network. For today's webinar, we'll be doing a book dissection on Islam, Authoritarianism and Underdevelopment, a global and historical comparison, a book written by Professor Ahmet Kuru. Yeah, so first of all, let me give a short description of Professor Ahmet Kuru. Professor Ahmet Kuru, thank you very much for joining us for this session today. And Professor Ahmet Kuru is a professor of political science at the San Diego State University. He received his PhD from the University of Washington and held a postdoctoral position at Columbia University. He is the author of award-winning Secularism and State Policies Toward Religion, the United States, France, and Turkey, a book which was published in 2009. And then 10 years later, he published his book, Islam, Authoritarianism, and Underdevelopment, a Global and Historical Comparison, in 2019 with the Cambridge University Press. This book has received the American Political Science Association's International History and Politics Section Award, and Professor Kuru's works have been translated into several languages. For example, Arabic, Bosnian, Chinese, French, German, Indonesian, Malay, Persian, and Turkish. So without further ado, well, before I invite Professor Kuru on our platform today, I would like to invite Brother Salman Ali, the CEO of the Islam and Liberty Network, to share with us a few words. Yes, Brother Ali Salman.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Nageeb, and welcome Dr. Ahmet Kuru to our joint webinar with Islamic Renaissance Front. We had the pleasure of hosting you earlier on our Island Talk Show, and I can tell you that it was the most widely viewed episode of our talk show so far. So you are indeed popular. And as Nageeb already shared, indeed, mashallah, your work has been already translated in, and being translated into several languages. And we're very happy to see you again in this interactive webinar. I think I would not like to steal the thunder from your thesis, but I would like to say from the point of view of Islam and Liberty Network that what you are saying is extremely significant, and the work which we have been doing is, as friends are aware, is advancing an understanding of political, religious, and economic freedom especially in Muslim majority countries, but also with respect to Islam more broadly. And in this sphere, I think in this context, one of the most important challenges we have faced is, when we face coercion from statist or state-influenced ideologies. We are of the opinion that Islam allows pluralistic interpretations. And that's the history of our civilization, and that is something which in the past many towering figures of Islamic thought, including classical fiqh of Islamic history, have already established. There was this richness of thought and richness of interpretation in our religion, and we have seen that when when we saw the coercion from any of these social factors, including state, we entered into problem. And so I think our work and your work has important overlaps. I think the way you explain the historical development within the Islamic history is extremely important. And I'm pretty sure that our audience would be very interested in knowingly and understanding deeply about your own thesis. And also, it is, I think it's not just historical in nature, it is quite contemporary in my view. in many Muslim societies and countries today, including the most recent development in Afghanistan. The issue of how much state influences our understanding of religion remains very relevant, and that has implications for peace in these societies, that has implications for prosperity of people living in the societies. So I think this is an important topic, and I'm glad that we are going to have an engaging conversation along with friends from Islamic Renaissance Front. So I hand over with these words back to Nageeb and look forward to listening to all of you.
Thank you very much, Brother Ali Salman. Yep. So for today's book dissection, yes, so Professor Kuru tries to answer this question: why are Muslim majority countries authoritarian and underdeveloped? Is it due to Islam itself? Is it due to Western colonization? According to Professor Kuru, it is not due to Islam, because Muslims were philosophically and socio-economically more developed between the 19th and 12th centuries. And it is also not due to Western colonization, because Muslims had already suffered political and socio-economic problems when colonization began. So what is the real reason behind the authoritarianism and underdevelopment that we see in most of the Muslim majority countries? Let's hear it from Professor Ahmet Kuru himself. Professor Ahmet Kuru, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with friends tonight and having this intellectual engagement on the book and broader issues. I'm very thankful to Dr. Ahmed Faruk Musa and my friend Ali Salman, both of them, and both of their institutions, Islamic Renaissance Front of Malaysia and Islam and Liberty Network. It's an honor for me to speak in their jointly organized event. And both of them really contribute to the translations of the book as friends, and I really appreciate their support. So let me share my PowerPoint presentation for about 20 minutes or so to clarify the argument with some maps and graphs. Then we'll be able to, inshallah, have some question and answers and discuss these issues in details. As hopefully you see in this presentation now, so the book has a subtitle of a global and historical comparison. And let me ask Dr. Nageeb, are you able to see the presentation? Everything okay? Yes, good. So Islam, Authoritarianism and Underdevelopment is a project I really work on about 10 years, maybe longer. And I am a political scientist, therefore I start with a global comparison, which leads me to a historical analysis. And the question, as already briefly mentioned, is about contemporary Muslim majority countries in the world today, 49 of them. And when we look at the data of democracy scores, unfortunately, authoritarianism in the Muslim world is the mainstream trend, and democracies are exceptions, like Indonesia, Senegal, and some Balkan countries and a few others. And when we look at the average rates, as you see in the table, only 14% of Muslim majority countries are electoral democracies, whereas the world average is 60%. And then when we look at socioeconomic criteria, such as GNI per capita, gross national income per capita, literacy rate, schooling, and life expectancy, again, Muslim averages, Muslim countries' averages are lower than the world averages. And for example, despite the fact that Muslims have 60% of world's oil and natural gas reserves, their gross national income average is lower than world average. So what explains this gap? And when we look at the academic literature and even daily political debates, we see that some people refer to Islam, whereas others said, no, it is Western colonization. I took both of the arguments very seriously throughout my book. In each chapter, I engage with the literature and the discussions, especially on the issue of colonization. I gave the number of Western exploitation, the number of slavery, the number of damage that they done in the Muslim majority countries. But still, I emphasize that, first of all, Islam is not the culprit. Islam had a golden age when Muslim philosophers and economic innovators were ahead of Europe for 400 or 500 years. Plus, even after the stagnant era began, Muslims still produce cutting-edge philosophers like Ibn Khaldun and cosmopolitan cities like Istanbul. And even today, it is not a monolith. It shows certain diversity and variation. Some democracies, many autocracies. Some developed, many not underdeveloped countries. In terms of colonialization and imperialism, again, chronologically, it began after Muslim world already had problems and stagnation. In different parts of the world, especially in East Asia and even Latin America, many post-colonial countries have achieved economic growth and some of them democratization, which show that being colonized doesn't necessarily prevent automatically democracy and development. And last but not least, normatively, I'm really asking Muslims to have a critical engagement with their own institutions and ideas. And recently someone asked me a verse from the Quran, whether I can justify. I said, yes, of course, there are many verses. And for example, in one of them, Surah 11 and verse 13, the Quran says, God does not change the condition of a people unless they change their inner selves. So the calling is to criticize your inner self and find a solution, looking your internal problem, rather than simply blaming others, rather than simply blaming Western colonization, imperialism. Look at your own societies. That's the normative aspect of the study. And finally, there is the new institutionalist, more academic emphasis, saying that good institutions bring development, bad institutions bring underdevelopment. So what are good and bad institutions? Basically, Acemoğlu and others, Daran Acemoğlu and others, refer to inclusive institutions as good, exclusive, extractive as bad. I am more sympathetic to this argument, but still asking, who built institutions? Where do institutions come from? So my argument now, let me summarize briefly, is that certain social classes build institutions. During the Muslim Golden Age, there were very active scholarly and economic entrepreneur class, and these two classes built positive, inclusive institutions. It was a process until the mid-11th century. But so I want to emphasize that things did not change overnight. European supremacy did not begin immediately after the mid-11th century. No, there were very long period of comparable levels of development. As you see in this table, I explained that between 700s and 1200s, roughly Muslim supremacy, then 1200s to 1700s, Muslims and European societies had comparable levels of philosophy and natural science plus economy. Only after the 17th century, Western supremacy began, and by and large continues until these days. So as you see in this table, I try to summarize here how Muslims in their early 5 centuries or so had a scientific and economic cutting edge and leading the world and teaching Europeans. And that's mostly an achievement by independent scholars and merchants. At the time, Europe was dominated by the Catholic Church and the monarchy. And the clergy-state alliance exists in Europe until the 11th century. After that, Europe changed with the institutionalization of church-state separation, because neither side was able to defeat the other, neither the Catholic Church nor the state was able to defeat the other. There was certain level of institutionalization of separation between them. Plus, there emerged universities in Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries, like Oxford, Cambridge. Plus, there emerged Italian city-state with a strong bourgeoisie in Florence, Venice, Genoa. So that's the European path, almost imitating or resembling early Muslim era. Whereas in the Muslim world, after the mid-11th century, there was an opposite direction. Less independent scholars, less merchants, but more ulama-state alliance. An alliance emerged between Islamic scholars, ulama, and the military state. And that really prevented the flourishing of scholars that really built Muslim achievements in early history. So what do I mean by scholars? I not only refer to philosophers like Khwarizmi, an eminent mathematician whose legacy is visible today in English, algorithm, algebra, and several mathematical formulas and numerical numbers that Muslims learned from India and taught to Western Europe. Razi was an eminent medical doctor who worked on bacteria and certain viruses. Ibn al-Haytham was a scholar of optics who innovated the early prototype of camera obscura, that the camera we use today. Farabi as an eminent political philosopher, Ibn Sina, again a medical doctor, also a philosopher, and Biruni, who wrote the most important book on India, which wasn't surpassed for about 600 years. In addition to all these philosophers, there were eminent Islamic scholars like Abu Hanifa. And what makes these Islamic scholars different from today's ulama was that overwhelmingly they were privately funded. So we have the data from Cohen's important analysis, which brought together 3,900 Islamic scholars between 8th and mid-11th centuries, and only 9% of them were state officials, whereas 91% were privately funded, and overwhelming majority were funded by commerce. Abu Hanifa, for example, was a silk merchant. Ahmet ibn Hanbal worked in textile sector. And these scholars with financial independence, they also had intellectual independence, and they refused to serve the state. When Abu Hanifa was offered to be judge, he refused. He was threatened by the Caliph of Abbasids. He was put in jail, he refused. Finally, unfortunately, he was poisoned to death. So, but Abu Hanifa, Ibn Hanbal, Malik, Shafi, they all refused, and it was an exception. It was the mainstream. Only Abu Yusuf and another student of Abu Hanifa who accept to be judge and serve, but they were minority. They were exception. The majority of the scholars were independent. But that was the process until the mid-11th century. What happened in the 11th century was a multi-level transformation. It began with an economic crisis in the 10th century. Therefore, in the 11th century, the Iqta system, which is basically a semi-feudal regime of state distribution of land revenues. And this Iqta system replaced the old monetary economy, and it shrank private landowners and the commercial class. And it helped the centralization of state. So that was the economic change. But there was also a religious change, as you see in this map. In the 11th century, the Middle East was mostly dominated by Shia dynasties and political powers. Fatimids in North Africa, Karmatis in Saudi Arabian Peninsula, sorry, not Saudi, but Arabian Peninsula, Hamdanis in today's Syria, Buyuts in Iraq and part of Iran. So in reaction to this Shia domination, the Abbasi caliphs, marginalized and symbolized only in Baghdad, call for a Sunni unification. A prominent Abbasi caliph, Qadir, declared a creed. For him, certain Shias were infidel, rationalist theologians, Mu'tazilis, were infidel, and non-practicing Muslims who do not pray 5 times a day were infidel. And this call meant to unify Sunnis against Shias. And it was later accepted by the Seljuks coming from Central Asia, replacing Karanis and Samanids, came to Baghdad, defeat the Buyuts, helped the Abbasi caliphs to reunify Sunnis and establish the Seljuk Empire. So to make the very long story short, under the Seljuk Empire in today's Central Asia, Iran and Iraq, Sunni Orthodoxy emerged based on Qadiri Creed and other documents and declarations. The Iqta system already established a state-centric system where the private ownership of land and merchants became weaker. Military state by the Seljuks made conquest-based new political system. Meanwhile, we have then the structural opportunities for change, plus the agency, Abbasi caliphs, Arabs, Seljuk sultans, Turks, Persian bureaucrats, Persian, and then the combination of them meant a new system. Nizam al-Mulk, as the Grand Vizier of the Seljuks, was the political leader of this new system. I call the Ulema State Alliance, institutionalized by the Nizamiya madrasas, and a genius scholar, Ghazali. He was both the best product of the Nizamiya madrasas and also best scholar who produced a theory for the new system. And the result, what was the result? The result was the marginalization of independent scholars and merchants, which led to a very long-term stagnation. So let me emphasize here that the system was not an Islamic one. It was just an interpretation of Islam. There exist multiple interpretations before the system, but most of them were marginalized by the state power, Seljuks, by the economic power, Iqta system, by institutions, Nizamiya madrasas. But theoretically, it was weak. And we can even understand its weakness by looking Ghazali, who at the age of 40 regret that it served the state. It took an oath going to the mausoleum of Prophet Abraham alayhi salam and said that he would never teach in Nizamiya madrasas again. He would never join the gatherings of state rulers again, and he would never receive money from them again. It showed that it wasn't really theoretically very strong, but political, economic power really make it possible and even spread to other parts of the Muslim world. And interestingly and unintentionally, foreign invaders helped the ulama state system. Let me very briefly say that the Mongols, Crusaders, and Timur occupy Muslim lands, killed millions of Muslims between 12th and 14th centuries. And unintentionally, they helped the ulama state alliance because when people saw their massacres, they sought refuge from military heroes. And the military heroes came in the form of first Saladin, who defeated the Crusaders and reconquest Jerusalem. Then Saladin established Ayyubi dynasty, and the Ayyubis established Nizamiya madrasas and ulama state alliance in today's Syria and Egypt. Then they were replaced by Mamluks, who stopped the Mongols, became hero again, gain legitimacy and rule Egypt for many, many centuries with ulama state alliance. And this Mamluk system also had a very eminent scholar, Ibn Taymiyyah, who in fact interpret a crucial verse in the Quran, asking Muslims to obey those who have authority. And Ibn Taymiyyah says the verse is asking Muslims to obey the umara and the ulama, basically the state authorities and the ulama. So ulama state alliance, according to him then, was a Quranic commandment. That's the interpretation. So as I said, despite the stagnation of intellectual life under the military rule, Muslims still produce very eminent scholars like Ibn Rushd, Ibn Khaldun. But their works were mostly neglected, sometimes destroyed in the case of Ibn Rushd. There were eminent merchants like Karimi merchants in Egypt, but eventually their properties were seized by Mamluks and their economic capacity was destroyed by the state. Therefore, European merchants dominated Mediterranean because Muslims, ulama state alliance and military rule really marginalized their own merchant class. So let me briefly show this table with data from Shass-Miller 1993 book, comparing the era between 8th and 11th centuries, and then the era between 12th and 15th centuries, to understand the impact of the rise of ulama state alliance, and in the particular case of Mamluks in Egypt. As you see, the commercial terms like today's bank manager, CFO, CEO, there were over 300 during the golden age, and after the ulama state alliance, there was a slight decline. But when you look at the occupational term of state and ulama, they jump from around 100 to around 500, which shows how ulama and the military state use resources instead of letting merchants and scholars use them. Finally came the three empires, Ottoman, Safavi, Mughal. As you see in this map, they were powerful. They meant that after the Mongol, Crusader, and Timuri invasions, Muslims were geopolitically and militarily recovered. But they were never recovered philosophically, even economically, because these three empires were based on military ulama's military state alliance. They focus on the military conquest. When at the time, Western Europeans had Renaissance, printing revolution, Reformation, Enlightenment, scientific revolution, Europeans used three main instruments: gunpowder, nautical compass, and printing press. But these three empires only used gunpowder because they had military commanders who understood and appreciated the value of this weapon. But there was no class in these empires who appreciate nautical compass or printing press sufficiently. So then about 300 years, Muslims did not use the printing press. Ottomans finally get printing press in 1729, the first Muslim major country. But in the 18th century, the total Ottoman books published is around 50,000. In the same century in Europe, 1 billion books were printed. What is the result? The result is that the estimated literacy rate in the Ottoman Empire around 1800, just 1%, whereas it was 31% in Western Europe. And this linked us to the contemporary analysis where I began by literacy gap between the Muslim world and the world average. And it has a historical roots, especially between the Muslim world and Western Europe. That's how Muslims became weaker than Western European powers, occupy and colonize. As you see in this map, at the beginning of the First World War, only the Ottoman Empire and partially Iran remain independent. After the First World War, even the Ottoman Empire was mostly colonized. So since the Ottoman Tanzimat reforms of 1839 to the present, many reformist leaders like Ottoman Sultan Mahmud and Egyptian Muhammad Ali Pasha, they tried to modernize. And especially in the 20th century, many leaders like Atatürk, Shah, Jamal Abdel Nasser, Habib Bourguiba, they were secularists. They sidelined the ulama, but did they solve the problem? No. Because these modernist attempts were mostly done by military generals and their top-down notion of modernization, which was very anti-intellectual and anti-bourgeoisie or merchant because they were statist. Then their failure really helped Islamists in Iran and elsewhere. There emerged modern versions of ulama state alliance. And today, when you look at Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, you see ulama state alliances. And these alliances were mostly funded by oil money. As you see in this table, many Muslim majority countries are oil rentier. They receive oil money to use for governmental revenue, which fund ulama state alliances. And then to conclude, therefore, Islam is not the culprit. We have to look at the historical relationship between ulama and state, how they use economic resources, how they control politics, and how they punish dissenting views. Colonization is damaging, but it was not the primary cause. It can be seen as an effect. Institutions matter, but who built the institutions? And then I argue that ulama state alliance has had the ideology and the power to build institutions which are mostly authoritarian and counterproductive. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer if you have any questions.
Thank you, Professor Kuru, yeah, for this nice presentation. Yes, and before we move on to questions from the floor, yeah, so I would just like to read a little bit from your book, yeah, especially the conclusion part. Okay, so you wrote, critically analyzing Muslim history may contribute to the construction of a new democratic and progressive relationship between Islam and the state today. In order to solve the problems of violence, authoritarianism, and underdevelopment, as well as catch up to Western levels of development, Muslims should establish competitive and meritocratic systems. These will require substantial socio-economic and political reform with ideological and institutional dimensions. For such a reform to take place, Muslims need creative intellectuals and an independent bourgeoisie who can balance the power of the ulama and state authorities. Yeah, so here I have one question here for you. So does this mean that we Muslims should not be interested in power? Or if we simply just get rid of power and, you know, because the vision of Islam, the final vision of Islam, as in, you know, like having a very minor role in contributing to things, should we simply accept that we have been defeated? Yeah, and accept this minor role? Wouldn't that make Muslims more vulnerable? Yeah, what's your point of view on this?
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. Let me emphasize that, first of all, as a Muslim individual, of course, you can be and you are entitled to be at the center of world politics and power politics. These are all fine. I'm not calling Muslims to be apolitical. What I am calling is that politics, economy, religion, academia, sports, arts, each of these spheres of life has its own criteria. We should respect that. For example, if you're an academic, and if you want to do politics, you can do that, but you should separate them. When you have students in your classroom, you should not look at their economic backgrounds, religious backgrounds. You just grade them in a fair way. Or if you are appointed as prime minister or elected as a prime minister, you should not mix your personal and identities with the fair policies you have to do. Therefore, what I am asking really every spheres of life to be autonomous in order to maintain justice. But while saying that, I am not rejecting and denying the reality that spheres are overlapping. You are a Muslim and politician and academic. It's possible to have multiple identities, or Muslims may want to inspire by their religion when doing certain different things. This is fine. But at the same time, we have to really acknowledge the importance of meritocracy, that if someone is qualified to do a job, the person should be given the job to do. And also, we need to avoid corruption. Let me give you an example. During this 2013 Gezi events in Turkey, there were protests against Tayyip Erdogan's government. And the government was really in a difficult position to defend itself. Then they want to use Islamic rhetoric to really demonize the protesters and convince the Muslim conservatives that government is right and should be supported. Then the media, pro-government, said that the Gezi protesters in 2013, they went to a mosque and drank beer in order to provoke the Muslim conservatives. Then the imam of the mosque was asked, and he said, I cannot lie. Nobody drank beer in my mosque. Then what happened? The government put this Istanbul imam at an isolated corner of Turkey to punish him. And out of 100,000 imams in Turkey, there's a big Diyanet institution, government agency. Did they support the imam who was speaking the truth? No, they did not. Am I blaming them? Kind of. Do I understand them? Of course, because they are state servants, 100,000 imam. No one stood up for the righteous truthfulness and defend the innocent imam who just said the truth, because all of them were afraid that the government would fire them and they lose their jobs. But this is the problem I am trying to emphasize today, that if an imam, if a member of the ulama class, if an Islamic scholar receive money from the state, then the person cannot tell the truth, defend their morality and ethics and akhlaq. This is the problem. Therefore, let me summarize saying that I don't want to have a wall of separation between religion, politics, academia. No, but I'm just saying that in order to be fair, just, and moral, there should be certain autonomy and respect their spheres. Otherwise, you see how politics dominate religion, corruption. Religion dominates economics, there will be corruption. And instead, we should division of labor among each other. Thank you. Did I answer your question? This is something you asked, or I explained different?
Yeah, I mean, it's more or less. Professor Kuru, yeah, we have many questions for today. Yeah, this is a very interesting topic for the audience. Yeah, so I'm going to move to the next question. Yeah, so, okay, we have one question from Dr. Munira Alatas. What we call a university today has had its origins in the 9th century Muslim world. By the 11th century, both Europe and the Muslims had a scholarly tradition. The first controlled by the church, Europe, and the latter with less restrictions, Islam. Can you explain the reversed situation today, with academic freedom being suppressed in many Muslim democracies, example Malaysia, while in the West there is more acceptance of knowledge, democracy, academic freedom?
Thank you. So this is a very broad question, important one. Let me briefly summarize that there was a major reversal between the Muslim world and Western Europe. For example, when Muslims started to produce paper, learning from Chinese in 8th century, Europe couldn't do that, didn't do that for about 500 years. They use animal skin, right? The result is that when Muslims had large libraries in Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, with hundreds of thousands of books, Western Europeans had only a few hundred books in their small monastery libraries, and that's all. But then later, when Europe started to have printing press, Muslims 300 centuries didn't get it. Then Europe had literacy, books, and reading, not the Muslims. There was the reversal. Same thing as the question mentioned in terms of freedom of speech or freedom of conducting research. 9th century Baghdad, Muslims established the biggest hospital of the time where Jewish and Christian medical doctors were working. 400 years later in Cairo, they again, Muslims, established a very major hospital called the Mansour Hospital. But this time they put in the establishing document that non-Muslim doctors cannot work in the hospital, non-Muslim patients would not be treated. But at the time, the most prominent doctors of Cairo were Christian. So then they converted to Islam really, or just tactically, to be able to make their physical profession. You see how there was decline, not progress. So modern time, we always think that there's always better. iPhone 4 is better than iPhone 3, but not in the Muslim history. Many things became worse, didn't get better. When we look at today, if you really want freedom, first of all, we have the problem of blasphemy and apostasy laws. Out of 50 Muslim majority countries, about 40 of them have blasphemy and apostasy laws. In 6 of them, blasphemy and apostasy is punished by death. So if you punish people's views about religion, and then how can you expect them to be sincere about the ideas? Because hypocrisy comes with prohibition. And if you really have this kind of pressures today, how can we expect young Muslims hoping about the future, making innovations and discoveries? Many of them are leaving. In Turkey, in Iran, in Arab countries, we have the problem of brain drain. Educated young people are leaving and going to Europe and the United States and other Western countries for better education and freedom of expression. And as the question emphasized, in many Muslim majority countries today, authoritarian regimes restrict religious, scientific, and other point of views. And we have to start from somewhere, at least theoretically. We have to accept that freedom of thought and private property are two valuable things. And at the beginning, Mr. Ali Saidam emphasized that Islam and Liberty Network emphasized that state intervention to private property and state intervention to freedom is a negative thing. So that's where we should start and say that. And from a Muslim point of view, freedom of speech is valuable because God creates human beings free, and private property is something essential in Islam. But when we look at the reality today, unfortunately, both of them have restrictions over.
Thank you, Prof. Kuru. We have one question from Andrew Koo. Given your analysis, how do Muslim majority countries emerge from this dilemma? A fair number of Muslim majority countries, including Malaysia, continue this ulama-state alliance. Does the Islamic world need a reformation of its own?
Thank you. So I recently wrote a 44-page report to summarize my book, update the contemporary data, and also make some policy recommendations. And let me repeat the recommendations as what I offer as solution. First of all, we have to acknowledge the problem. Unfortunately, there is the denial. And I understand the psychology. And psychologically, when human beings are unhappy, they first deny. And even in American academia now, there is so much denial that, oh, they say, what do you mean by democracy? How do you know democracy is good? Development is a subjective term. How do you know that Muslim countries are less developed? But when you live in Turkey, Malaysia, Iran, Egypt, you know the reality. There are problems. No need to deny them. And no need to blame those who talk about these problems as Orientalists, Islamophobe. No, take the issue critically in order to find a solution. Second issue, it's neither Islam nor Western imperialism. It's really a historical problem with certain institutions. The emergence of ulama and state makes it very difficult to express a dissenting opinion. Third issue is that there is an economic dimension of the ulama-state alliance. There is ideological dimension about its theory and its finance. The finance, as I briefly said in the presentation, mostly coming from oil. Saudi Arabia, Iran, these countries not only fund their ulama-state alliance at home by oil money, but also spread their Salafi or Shia Islamist messages across the world. And this oil money, luckily, will not perpetuate. Eventually, it will wither away because either oil reserves will be depleted or there will be new technologies of energy. So oil age may end before the end of oil, as stone age ends before the end of stones, right? So Muslim countries need to be ready for economically restructuring themselves. And when we combine this, that don't deny the question, accept it, understand the historical root cause, understand the economic aspect of it, that's where we can begin really solve the problem.
Thank you, Prof. Kuru. That question was actually from Andrew Koo, a human rights lawyer in Malaysia. Our next question will be from Dr. Bakri Musa, a renowned surgeon from California. Yeah, we have our audience is quite broad today. Yes, so Dr. Musa's question is, Islamic scholars have been the effective bulwark against errant rulers as per Noah Feldman's The Fall and Rise of Islamic State. What triggers this ulama ruler complex, which in Malaysia has also morphed into triangulation between secular political leaders versus ulama class versus royalty class? During colonial times, benign neglect towards religion, the ulama were marginalized. What triggered this ulama involvement in secular politics?
So interestingly, in many cases, secularists and Islamists assume that they are very different. But in reality, unfortunately, they are very similar. Why? Because in the Muslim world, most secularists have authoritarian ideas, very much embrace authoritarian ideas. And if you ask them why, they say, we really need quick modernization. And then the best way, quickest way is top down. And or people are ignorant. Many of them are religious bigots. So what we can do is really state authority. That's why from Atatürk, Kemal Atatürk of Turkey to Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, in many other places, military or authoritarian rulers really imposed top-down secularization, which backfired mostly, and also reproduce anti-intellectualism and anti-bourgeoisie. The state-centric approach, either coming from Islamists or secularists, is really inefficient and in the long run produce underdevelopment, not only authoritarianism, but also underdevelopment. So you may ask, how come China and other East Asian countries achieve development despite authoritarianism? Because they have a different types of authoritarianism. So I explain in my book that, first of all, China and other East Asian authoritarian regimes, they invest in education. Muslim autocracies did not. We have the PISA score of high school students all around the world, and the East Asia, democratic or authoritarian, top 10, and Muslim majority, I mean East Asia, non-Muslim countries. And Muslim countries generally bottom 10. That's one problem. Second, East Asia is mostly heavily taking the Japanese model of expert-oriented economic growth. Whereas, especially in the Middle East, so Malaysia, Indonesia is different, but in the Middle East, based on oil and military adventure, wars, civil wars, occupation, that's another different oil-based military adventures, authoritarianism. Then the third thing is obviously ulama-state alliance, that ulama making excuses, trying to, for example, now shape the textbooks in Pakistan. They intervene education system in Turkey, etc. That's not the problem in East Asia. So even if with certain type of authoritarianism East Asians achieve economic growth, we cannot, because our authoritarianism is very much unfriendly with economic growth. So the last thing about the ulama-secularist relationship, I think it's a binary reciprocal benefits, because many secularist leaders wanted to use ulama. In Turkey, for example, secularists established the Diyanet, as I just referred, as 100,000 imams, as a state agency. Secularist party, CHP, Atatürk's party, they say, if we have this agency, we can use the ulama for our political purposes. And similarly, in Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser, then Sadat, Mubarak, want to use Al-Azhar. So they were secularists, especially Jamal Abdel Nasser, but they promote the ulama in order to really legitimize their authoritarian rule. So that's how the ulama and the military, in many cases, support each other. Let me conclude by an anecdote. When I was studying secularism in France, a major case was the headscarf ban in 2004. That was my first book comparing United States, France, and Turkey, and asking why Turkey and France banning headscarf of Muslim students, but not United States. At the time, Sarkozy was the Minister of Education. When France was banning headscarves, Sarkozy came to Egypt to meet with Sheikh of Al-Azhar, the president of Al-Azhar University and the madrasa, Tantawi. And then Sarkozy asked Tantawi, what is your opinion about we French state banning Muslim girls' headscarves? Then the Sheikh said, it is okay, it's perfectly fine. You are a non-Muslim country, you can ban headscarves. And we all were shocked. But now I understand that no need to be shocked. That's the ulama, as state servant, has no idea what individual liberties are, how Muslim students in France have rights, how the headscarf ban should be criticized from liberal point of view. But the ulama were so used to justify whatever the state does, the Sheikh of Al-Azhar justify even the French state.
Thank you, Prof. Kuru. Yep. One more question from Dr. Bakri Musa is, could you comment on your countryman Timur Kuran's analysis on the role of inheritance laws and underutilization of Waqf in holding back Muslim economic underdevelopment. In Malaysia, billions of Faraid assets are trapped and underutilized.
Thank you. This is an important question. Timur Kurant, an eminent scholar, a good colleague, and he is now writing another important book. So Dr. Musa's question referring to Timur Kurant's 2011 book, The Long Divergence, and criticizing certain institutions and arguing that the economic divergence between the Muslim world and Western Europe were mostly due to three aspects of Islamic law. As the question referred to, first of all, the law of inheritance, the law of waqfs, and the law of corporation. So when I analyzed each of the three in my book, I said that the law of inheritance doesn't seem convincing because the idea that Muslims give inheritance right to women, but Western Europeans did not in their early history. So it's something we have to celebrate, that Muslims give inheritance to women. We should not criticize, because today Muslims are criticized for really not giving 100% inheritance. So then criticizing them historically to give in 50% seems a bit weird. But on the other two issues, it was convincing that waqfs were inefficient. And when the Dutch and British and others established large corporations, Muslims were not able, and the law didn't adapt. That's why Timur Kurant's book is convincing. But my main criticism in my book is that I ask, where does the law come from? And why didn't law change until the 19th century? My own explanation is the role of state, authoritarian state, in alliance with the ulama, froze the economy, didn't allow the bourgeois class to demand new legislation, whereas in Netherlands and the United Kingdom, the bourgeoisie took charge, established parliaments. They even established armies to kill the king in United Kingdom. That's how they changed the law. So if you have organized class defending their rights, then they can change the law. I can't hear you. I think you are muted.
Sorry for that. Yes, I was muted. Yes, this question is from Muhammad Gaud. Yeah, his question is, was the eclipse of the Mutazilites by the Asharites one reason, or even the main reason, for the stagnation and backsliding of Muslims in scientific inquiry?
Thank you. I think it was important, but not the main, even not as an essential reason. It was just a symptom of a deeper, bigger problem, because the ideas of Asharite and the Mu'tazilas is they are part of the power structure, and ideas without the power structure don't have impact. Ghazali, for example, have many interesting ideas. For example, in the book about Zandaka, Ghazali says that Byzantines and the Turks can go to heaven and they may have salvation, because he considered Turks as non-Muslim at the time. Probably at the time Ghazali writing, many Turks were not Muslim, or he thought that way. And he said that the people of Byzantium, Eastern Rome, and Turks, they don't know what the Prophet Muhammad's real meaning. And in Eastern Rome, there is propaganda that the Muhammad was a bad person and this and that. Therefore, the people were ignorant of the reality of the Prophet ﷺ. Therefore, they can have salvation because of this excuse. For example, this is a very interesting idea, right? But many people don't know it, because the power structure was not happy with this idea. It didn't fit it. Therefore, it was eliminated. But Ghazali said another thing in Ihya Ulumuddin, which is that religion and state are twin brothers. Religion is the foundation, state is the guardian. that without structure collapse, that without guardian perishes. This was really liked and appealed by the Ulama State Alliance. They use it, they redistribute, they even declare it as a hadith, which is not a hadith, it's a fabrication. So therefore, idea is important, but power structure, social classes, they let certain ideas to be heard and they remove certain ideas. And therefore, we have to analyze both the power structure and the ideas. Ideas themselves, they are not really enough to explain. They are not sufficient. You are mute again.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kuru. So we have one question regarding the Taliban. Yeah, so the question is, I am curious to know which instances of fiqh and usulul fiqh they are trying to implement, probably from the Hanafi school. My best guesses are Fatawa Alamgiri fiqh and the Hidayah Usulul fiqh. Are these good guesses? Do you want to name few more sources?
Thank you. I wrote an article about Taliban and its ideological and religious roots. It was published in Turkish. I'm very afraid of getting it published in English and Arabic. So it was translated, but I don't know whether I should publish because I'm afraid of the reaction that it may receive negative reaction. So, but eventually I will get them published in English and Arabic too. Because where I said that, first of all, we all know that Taliban, the name coming from their madrasa education, right? Students. Some of them are scholars, like the founder of Taliban, Mullah Omar. And they were trained in Deobandi schools, Deobandi madrasas, mostly in Pakistan. And Deobandi madrasas were founded in India, in the city of Deoband. It is Hanafi, but it's very orthodox Hanafi. I regard myself Hanafi, but I'm not like Deobandi. There are different Hanafis, okay? So they are very different. Orthodox, strict, I would say generally bigotry, because one calculated that they issue 124,000 fatwas, including fatwas against photograph and television, that photos are haram and television haram. Therefore, this Zoom webinar is haram and we are all committing sin right now. May Allah forgive us if they are wrong. So that's strict, very orthodox and conservative Deobandi school. But we all know that it's not the whole story. There are more. That after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan started the jihad against the Soviets. And meanwhile, Saudi Salafi Wahhabi ideas influenced many groups in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and Taliban was one of them. Therefore, it's a combination of both Hanafi, orthodox methods of fiqh and Salafi ideas. And I don't think they pick and choose from Fatawai Alamgiriya or Fatawai Hindiya, because they have their own fatwas about how Muslim female students cannot or can go to school, etc. But I think, again, ideas matter, problematic, we have to challenge. But these ideas are results of certain contexts, of course, that Soviet invasion, then the Civil War, then American invasion, radicalism. So whatever you put in Afghanistan, the result would not be nice because of the economic and political conditions there. That's also a part of the picture. Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, he had very notorious ideas. He said that certain Muslim rulers can be killed if they don't follow Sharia. Why? Because he wanted to justify Mamluk war against Mongols at a time when Mongol leadership became Muslim. But Ibn Taymiyyah was against Mongols because they destroyed his town, Haran. And in order to justify, he said, okay, you can still attack and kill Mongols because even if they were converted to Islam, they don't use and implement Sharia. But then Sayyid Qutb and others took these notorious ideas and spread in Sayyid Qutb's notorious book, Milestones. Anyhow, so I don't have time to deal, but ideas have a background and structure.
Thank you, Prof. Kuru. We have another question from Dr. Olsi from Albania. It's quite a long question, please bear with me. Yeah, so from the book and presentation of Dr. Kuru, I do not see proper attention given to colonialism and Western aggression against Islam. We have examples of Turkey, Iraq, Syria, where Western imperialism have destroyed any achievement that they made during the 20th century. The American-Israeli alliance has and is a major factor of wars and underdevelopment in the Muslim world. Let's see Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Libya, etc., how they are put under embargo and bombed and sent back to the Stone Age. The achievement that Iraq had during the rule of Saddam Hussein was destroyed by the Bush-Tony Blair aggression. Another example is Iran, where the Israeli-American alliance has put the country under a total embargo only because the country is ruled by a Muslim clergy that does not accept to abandon Palestine to Zionist colonizers. On the other hand, we have the Ulama colonialist alliance. An example is Turkey, where the Gulenist network has become a tool of US-Israeli imperialism. In the Balkans, Albania, for example, the Gulenists are openly used by the Americans to destroy the structure and religious freedoms of Muslims. On the other hand, we have a look at totally secularized Muslim states from Kazakhstan to Albania, where the colonizers destroyed totally Islam. Shouldn't we, instead of looking at Ulama state alliance, see the problem at the external factor, the continuous war and sabotage of the West against Islam, and by the way, address the manipulation of Muslim ulama by the colonialist? An example is France and its fascist policies against Muslim women, or the Tony Blair Foundation, which wants to create a Zionist-friendly Islam.
So, first of all, there are many factual errors in this question that if we make a fact checked, I think there are 10 to 15 mistakes. You are so wrong. And you have to check your facts and fix them. Second, try to have more nuanced language. And especially if you ask a question in such an academic setting, your question should be written better. And this language, referring constantly Zionist, this and that, it's really unfortunate that you have to spend more time, think deeper, try to understand the details, read more, learn more. First, try to understand rather than making a political statement. We are here to discuss, understand. Let me tell you about Turkey, for example. Turkey was not bombed by United States or Israel. Turkey is an ally of Israel, and Tayyip Erdogan has been very friendly with Israel. Turkey was really a part of the West. It's still a member of NATO. It's a European Union member. Yes, of course, it has had many problems, and I wrote about them, how Gulenists are problematic. I have articles criticize, and Gulenists report me to Twitter for the article criticizing them. That's another story. But look at the impact of the West on Turkey. I would say that in the 20th century, the Western impact on Turkey has been overall positive, because it was Turkey who applied and asked help of the United States. Because after the Second World War, Stalin threatened Turkey, saying that we, the Soviet Union, won the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, and we won certain towns in eastern Turkey. Then Turkey applied to the United States, wanted to be NATO member. And the same Turkey received money from the United States And with the US encouragement in 1950, Turkey had the first democratic elections. So I'm not here to overly romanticize the West. Of course, the West occupy and destroy. But at the same time, to demonizing, exaggerating is unnecessary. And I don't think this question is worth more time to spend. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Kuru. We have one question from Adriana Abu, also a lawyer from Malaysia. Why is a majority of us Muslims keeping quiet and doing nothing when we see major crimes against humanity being imposed on us and our brethren in our own country and all over the world? Even in Malaysia, there are many examples of bullying by the Muslim clerics, but the majority of us keep quiet, and these majority are not illiterate and poor. We are only up in an uproar when the Palestinians are attacked, but a non-Muslim fellow citizen is bullied and we keep quiet.
That's really an important question, and look at the case of China. Now, China is conducting an ethno-religious cleansing of 10 million Muslim Uyghurs by putting 1 million of them into concentration camps. And Western media, so some of the audience keep criticizing West, but look, the Western media document, not the Muslim media, the raping, the torture, and the ethnic cleansing of Muslims in China. And unfortunately, many Muslim leaders going to China, shaking hands, the leader of Saudi Arabia, the leader of Turkey, the leader of many other Muslim majority countries, they don't really make it an important case, and some of them simply don't care. So why? I think they are mostly nationalists. They are just focusing on the national interests of their countries. They say China is too big. But again, it's really counterproductive to be simply anti-Western, because if the United States today, it just collapse, what will happen? Do you think that Muslim countries just dominate the world? No. The world will be dominated mostly by China, Russia, and other non-Muslim powers. Therefore, compare and look at which is better, to what extent better. And especially in the case of China, how Muslim leaders are silent, it's really embarrassing.
Thank you, Professor Kuru. Yeah, we have a question here from Sharifa Noor. How do Muslim countries neutralize the role of ulama and state? Is it possible to have a fair, progressive Muslim country? Could we use Iran as an example?
Sorry, I didn't understand the last part. Can you repeat?
Okay, could we use Iran as an example?
To do what?
How do Muslim countries neutralize the role of ulama and state?
Okay, first of all, Iran can, yeah, it is possible. Iran, of course, is not the example, because Iran is the example of ulama-state alliance, that the mullahs and the state establish an alliance. They didn't neutralize, but they have the best example with Taliban. I think the ulama is controlling executive, legislative, and judicial power. The neutralization really requires first to start with the theory, that the idea that this ulama-state alliance is not coming from Islam's theology. It's not coming from Islam's history, early history. It only emerged in the 11th century. Even its main architect, Ghazali, regrets that he served the state. Even the hadith they claim religion-state alliance is a fabrication. It was a maxim of Sasani King Ardashir. And Muslims embrace Sasani understanding of ulama-state alliance and keep repeating that. And to tell Muslims that this is not a religious duty, and it's really contradict what we understand today as democracy. It doesn't serve to justice and many other Islamic goals. And that's where to begin with. And then Muslim masses should appreciate intellectuals, because in many Muslim societies, being an intellectual is a negative thing, because they say, oh, don't read too much, don't think too much, you can lose your brain, and this and that. Of intellectuals are full of questions, they are too much skeptical. But look, in the last 1,000 years, what did thousands of Islamic scholars produce rather than repeating again and again the same things? When you have COVID, you ask help from medical doctors, right? When you have social and economic and political problems, you need to ask help from social scientists. So if you undermine all the intellectuals and scientists and only appreciate Islamic scholars, you end up with underdeveloped societies.
Thank you, Professor Kuru. We have one question from my count. Yeah, a little known fact, Islamophobia, as initially used in French, referenced the fear that Muslims have of what other Muslims may do, insofar as Muslim violence, in the event that one Muslim says something possibly critical that a lot of other Muslims don't like. This is the original meaning and use of the word. You have any views on this? Yeah.
So Islamophobia is a major problem now, anti-Muslim feeling and sentiments. And I recently wrote an article in Germany's Kantara web portal of Deutsche Welle, saying that Western Muslims, or Muslims who live in Western societies, know both the West and the Muslim world. They should be the best actors to fight against Islamophobia and anti-Westernism. That's my hope for the future.
Thanks, Prof. Kuru. We have a question from Indonesia, from Tien from Indonesia. I'm asking permission to ask for clarification, according to you, whether the current Taliban and Zionist radicalism in Islamic countries is one of the setbacks of global and Islamic history itself.
I don't think the Taliban regime would be a globally influential. It's a local thing. And I don't think it will be really a major issue. Yeah, I don't expect it to have any global impact.
Okay. Another question from Utabek. How can we produce liberal ideologies that can have a global impact like Ghazali's works have had on the Muslim world?
It should be a teamwork. One individual cannot produce that. There should be multiple scholars supporting each other, making team projects, and eventually they will need people's support. Therefore, conditions, structure, condition, and agency, both are necessary.
Okay, question from Alfian. Judges in the contemporary US federal legal system are state appointed. Is there an alliance here?
A good question. The answer is no, because Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. Therefore, they don't depend on state. They are free. The state, no one can do anything to them. If the question is about Supreme Court justices, if other judges, so in the United States, even if you are not appointed for life, for other judges, there is certain level of freedom because judiciary has its own autonomy. And then if government tries to intervene, the judges, starting with the Supreme Court, protect certain level of autonomy of judiciary. That's what I meant by the separation and autonomy of different spheres.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. What is the role of the establishment and abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate when we talk about the underdevelopment of the Muslim countries?
So it wasn't a major thing because first of all, the Ottomans didn't use the term caliph until they lost Crimea to Russia. And they lost Crimea to Russia in 1774, the first time Ottomans lost a Muslim majority territory. Then the Ottoman caliphs or the Sultan says, okay, I no longer am the Sultan of Crimea in northern Black Sea, but I am the caliph. Therefore, Muslims there regard me as the leader. So that's how Ottomans became politically weak, started to use the title caliphate. And when it was abolished, it no longer was relevant. Because in the First World War, when the Ottoman Caliph declared jihad against Britain, together with Germany, the Ottomans declared jihad against Britain, most Arab leaders didn't listen to. And Sharif Hussein of Arabian Peninsula, Wahhabis in Arabian Peninsula, they all cooperate with Britain against the Ottoman. The caliphate was taken seriously only by Muslims in India. Therefore, in the Middle East, it no longer was important when it was abolished.
Thank you, Prof. Kuru. We have another question from Dr. Bakri Musa. Can you comment on the role and state of education in holding back Muslim countries? The American University of Beirut is the crown jewel of the Arabic intellectual world, despite the mess the country is in. The Gulf states are setting up many American-style colleges. In Cairo, the American university there has eclipsed Al-Azhar. Would liberal education a la US style be beneficial in opening up Muslim minds?
So definitely certain Western institutions are very effective. That's why the Ottoman Empire itself, after in 1830s, emulate the European model, establish European style schools and colleges, because the madrasas were very outdated and the madrasas just focusing on religious sciences. And even today, Muslims really need to learn many things from Western institutions. The issue of plagiarism, for example. When I compare Turkey and the United States, the two countries I know the best, plagiarism is very widespread and a major problem in Turkey. That's not the case in the United States. So then Turks really need to learn from American universities how to deal with the problem of plagiarism.
Thank you, Prof. Kuru. We have one more question from Dr. Munira Alatas. This is a hypothetical question. If we took oil reserves out of the equation, could the Muslims be more united, less corrupt, less oppressive to their own people?
Maybe eventually, but of course not in 5 years. But I agree with you that oil is a problem. And when the oil era ends, it will be something positive. Hopefully, it will not lead to starvation, because in some Arab countries, when oil money is gone, there may be the problem of starvation and abject poverty. That's a concern. Other than that, hopefully, things will be relatively better without oil.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, we have one question which was asked much earlier is, I guess indirectly you have answered that. The question is, okay, I'll ask it again. What should the Muslim world do next?
They should read the book. Many people. But there are 35 people. How come you ask more than 30 questions? Everybody asks one question, 35, right?
Yeah, well, we had a lot of questions today, surprisingly, a lot. Yes. Well, I think we have, maybe one last question, Prof. Kuru, if you're not too tired. I know it must be late for you there. Yeah, one last question.
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah. So one question from Andrew Koo, our human rights lawyer in Malaysia. Are there good examples of countries that accept Islamic religious pluralism? How can we promote this without descending to political or military contestations?
So first of all, contestation is part of democratization, and democracies are coming with sometimes, unfortunately, chaos and struggle, sometimes blood. In the French example, in many other cases, it's not easy to establish a democratic regime, and people really need to ask for their freedoms, their liberty, and fight for it. But hopefully that eventually the institutional mechanisms will be established. What I see in many Middle Eastern countries, particularly in Turkey, there is this undermining of theory. if you talk theoretically, people say, oh, you are an academic with just abstract ideas, etc. But they don't understand that. You should start with the theory. It's like a building that the architect should make the design for a monument. If the architectural design has flaws, the whole building will collapse. So in many Muslim majority societies, theory is not taken seriously. That's related to anti-intellectualism, because intellectuals are regarded sometimes too much Western, brainwashed by Western ideas. Sometimes, as I said before, too much skeptic, non-believers and this and that. But without intellectuals, without critical minds, just following some religious leaders, political leaders, they are making speeches without theoretical basis and not seeking for consistency. Whatever system you build will collapse. And consistency is a very difficult thing. Let me tell you, people say that Islam is the religion of peace. And the same people said that those who leave Islam should be killed. Don't you see the inconsistency? I can give dozens of such examples, and we don't have time to elaborate, but consistency is very important. But in order to be consistent, you really need time to spend contemplation. And in Islam, as I understand, 1 hour of contemplation is more important than sometimes they say 1 year of ibadah or worshiping. But that's not what we learn in mosques, in religious circles. They always emphasize rituals. They are important. I don't deny that. Worshipping is important. But isn't thinking, contemplating, and tafakkur important too? I think that's what's missing, that we see so much talking, very little theory and consistency. If there are a few more questions, you can ask. Yeah, maybe 3 if there are, or we can finish. It's up to you.
I think we can, the main questions have been asked. I think we can, we've come to the end of this session. Sure. So I would really like to thank you, Professor Ahmet Kuru, for this wonderful discussion we've had today. And I would like to, I've read your book cover to cover. I would put that book in the list of essential reading. It's an amazing book, very well researched. 76 of pages for the bibliography. No wonder you said it took 10 years to produce a book like this. This is not for the, it's deep reflection. This book is very well argued. You were very fair-minded in looking at different positions. Myself, when I read your book, so I try to read it with a blank mind. So initially, when I start reading it, my feeling is this Kuru guy is just another sellout. That was my feeling. But as I read it more and I could understand more the arguments that you brought in, I could understand the depth. The depth of the argument that went in. And as you rightly mentioned, reflection is very important here. It's not just reading lightly. It's the deep reflection that will really give us the right answers, the right alternatives. So I strongly recommend this book. It's an excellent book. So I would also like to thank our the friends of IRF and all those who have joined us today for contributing very actively to this webinar. We had about 36 participants, but we had really a lot of questions. I think this was a very engaging topic. And the content of the book speaks for itself. So on if Professor Kuru has any last words for us before we let you go. We've taken a lot of your time today.
No, thank you. I truly appreciate your contribution, and Dr. Nageeb, it was an excellent moderation. I'm thankful to everyone asking questions, and I I keep remembering and thinking about them. Thank you. And again, I'm grateful to Ali Salman and Dr. Musa for organizing Islamic Renaissance Front and Islam and Liberty Network. Thank you for all the team members and participants. Have a good one.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahmet Kuru. Yeah, so on behalf of the Islamic Renaissance Front, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. And we look forward to having you again for our next webinar. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.